The beautiful Omega tilted his head and asked me, "Chris, do you think Lewis will like me?" "Of course, a wonderful Omega like you. Mr. Liu will definitely cherish you in his hands." The Omega shyly lowered his head, his voice sweet. "Thank you, Chris. Chris is a very good person too." The Omega before me was innocent and carefree, and I only felt a bitter taste fill my throat. How could I tell him that this was the 5th year I had been with Lewis? Lewis was getting married, and I left his house with a backpack. Lewis was very generous to me. The wardrobe was full of custom-made clothes, handcrafted leather shoes, and gifts galore. Is that cheap Chris doesn't match expensive things. If I left here with Chris, there would be no room for these things to be used anymore. So one backpack was more than enough. Perhaps I took too few things. The butler didn't even notice I was moving out, only assuming that Lewis was on a business trip and I was returning to my own home for a few days. On the 3rd day of my return home, the butler called me. "Mr. Chun, young master will be home around 7 o'clock. Do you need a car sent to pick you up?" My home wasn't in the city, but in a village below H City. It would take nearly 2 hours without traffic, and 7 o'clock was rush hour, so the butler needed to arrange it in advance. "Sir?" Seeing my silence, the butler called out again. "I'm not coming back. Isn't he getting married? I'm not coming back ever again." After saying that, I hung up the phone and continued splitting firewood in the yard. Before I could split 2 more logs, Lewis's call came in. "Chris, are you being stubborn again? What do you mean you won't come back just because I'm getting married? Get your ass back here. Don't make me say it a second time." He was dominant, impatient, and always spoke in a commanding tone. Of course, every time I would listen to him. But now I refused. "You're getting married, so don't come looking for me anymore. Simon is a very good Omega. You should treat him well and don't do anything to let him down." I blurted it out in one breath, then immediately hung up the phone. If I didn't hang up, he would probably say something very unpleasant. I continued to swing my arms and split wood. This repetitive, mechanical, and aimless physical labor gave me a sense of peace. I like to find goals in this aimless life, just like splitting this pile of wood today. An hour after I turned off my phone, my younger brother Jason appeared before me. Unlike me, a beta, he was an alpha who graduated from a prestigious university. After graduation, he had been working at Lu Group, rising steadily, and had reached a managerial position within 3 years of graduating. Dressed in a suit and leather shoes, meticulous. He came in, saw me splitting wood, called out brother, then squatted down, rolled up his sleeves, and started gathering the split wood scattered on the ground. He was always a good student from a young age. His family never made him do chores, and for years he'd been tapping away at a computer in an air-conditioned room. How could he possibly do this kind of work? Every movement was comical. I stopped him. "Just say what's on your mind. You don't need to do these chores around the house." He paused his wood stacking, then gave an awkward smile. "I'm not busy. I just want to help Big Brother finish quickly so we can go back to the city together." I stood the axe on its head, leaning on the handle, quietly looking at the alpha in front of me who was already half a head taller than me. Suddenly, I felt a sense of unfamiliarity. I used to study too, but my family couldn't afford 2 children, so I went out to work before even finishing high school to help support the family. Back then, my parents and relatives were all weighing the pros and cons, saying that no matter how well I studied, I would only be a beta. But my younger brother was different. He was an alpha. They said it was a sign of great fortune for our old Chin family's ancestors that an alpha was born, and that he would have a bright future. I didn't feel that alphas were inherently noble. I just felt that I was the older brother. My parents weren't diligent people. They would squander any money they earned at the card table and were unwilling to work hard. Otherwise, my family wouldn't have struggled to afford our schooling. So, from the moment I decided to drop out and work, the burden of supporting the family also fell upon me. Each month, I only kept money for food, sending the rest home. I supported Jason through junior high, high school, and university, and used my relationship with Lewis to get him an internship at Lu's Group after graduation. Later, when relatives heard that I had gotten Jason an internship at Lu's Group, they all changed their tune and came to me asking for connections. I chuckled. "I'm just a driver. I helped Jason submit his resume, and it's also because his school is good. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten in." They then turned to my brother, telling him how they'd always had high hopes for him since childhood. and that he shouldn't forget them once he found his footing at Lou's. Most of them were unsophisticated, and my parents also firmly believed I was just a driver, constantly boasting about Jason's promising future. But Jason, do you really not know what your older brother does? Why did you insist on staying at Lou's after your internship, despite my objections? Why did you come to pick me up when I was planning to leave Louis? Don't you know Louis is getting married? What identity do you want your older brother to maintain by Louis's side? I lowered my head, my eyes burning. This is the child I raised. After a moment to compose myself, I looked up at him. Get out. My parents returned home by shuttle bus early the next morning. Ever since the family's fortunes improved and they built a 2-story house, they had been obsessed with visiting relatives and friends, even distant relatives. They hadn't contacted for years. They'd go to see, just to show off how excellent their son was. This time they said they'd be gone for a week, but they came back after only 2 days. I served them food, set out chopsticks, and asked them why they were back so early. My mom glanced at me, then raised her hand and swept the noodles I'd cooked onto the floor. The hot soup splashed onto the back of my foot, and for a moment, it stung fiercely. I took a step back, watching as my mom continued to rage at me. Your brother said you quit? You're a beta with no education and no background. Being able to be Mr. Lou's driver was a blessing you earned over 3 lifetimes. But no, you just quit like that. You quitting is one thing, but have you considered your brother's feelings? He still works at Lou Corporation. If you ruin your brother's future because of this, I'm not finished with you. My mom rattled on, telling me to apologize to Louis and then go back to work properly. As for my dad, he sat to the side smoking a cigarette. He smokes 2 or 3 packs of those 60+ yuan cigarettes every day, and it's not enough for him to smoke them himself. He also shares them with others, just so everyone in the village knows he smokes. He never scolds me, but he never defends me either. When Mom kept making demands, he just sat there silently, as if he didn't dare speak or didn't know what to say. But actually, Mom's demands were his demands too. Mom just voiced them for him so he didn't have to play the villain. I looked at them and asked, what if I just don't go back? My mom suddenly stood up, mustered all her strength and slapped me. Then get out of my house. This is my home too. I paid to build this house. I was a little agitated, and my voice got louder. But my mom's voice was even louder, completely drowning mine out. So what if you paid? That's what you should do. We gave birth to you and raised you, so you should earn money for us to spend. You owe us a debt you can never repay in a lifetime. You're building a house for your parents and still have the nerve to bring it up? Have some shame. I was kicked out, still carrying that same backpack without adding anything else. I squatted by the roadside, feeling that the June weather was surprisingly cold. A Chris who couldn't generate income for the family was meaningless. What about for Louis? What was Chris's meaning? Just a tough beta, more durable than an Omega, who wouldn't be marked, and for whom no responsibility was needed. Just a toy who would sell his life for a small sum of money. I knew I was just a little trinket by Louis's side, but he was getting married. Simon truly was a very kind Omega. He also only thought of me as Louis's driver. He'd buy me soda, hand me an umbrella on rainy days, and even share the little cookies he baked for Louis with me. He always looked at me with sparkling eyes, asking about Louis's preferences, then recorded them in his little notebook, treasuring it in his chest pocket. He really liked Louis. When I somewhat subtly told him that marrying Louis might not be a happy thing. But he said he had met Louis when he was very young, and he liked him the first time they met. Even this arranged marriage was something he fought hard for with his family elders. Just thinking about seeing Louis every day when he opened his eyes made him uncontrollably happy. Seeing this, I said no more, just quietly watched this beautiful Omega gesticulate as he envisioned his future. Such an Omega, Louis shouldn't let him down. Even if he were to let him down, it shouldn't be because of me. I pulled out my phone card and walked slowly along the national road. Since I'm not with Louis, I can't stay in this house, so I won't. Almost 24 hours had passed since Louis called Chris. Louis was displeased. That beta still hadn't come home. He was the only son of the Lou family, and because he wanted to be with Chris, he had put off marriage and having children until he was 30. This year, his old man issued an ultimatum, telling Louis to have a child as soon as possible. Louis retorted, he's a beta, how can he give birth? Male beta uteri are not fully developed and do not have reproductive functions, but this doesn't mean there are no other methods. A catalyst used to promote the differentiation of undifferentiated omegas can be injected into a beta, allowing the beta's congenitally underdeveloped reproductive cavity to undergo secondary development to achieve the purpose of reproduction. However, this drug is strictly forbidden for use by anyone other than omegas. But for a family of the Lu family stature, they don't need to follow the rules. They can do whatever they want. Louis rubbed his fingers, pondering for a moment, but then decided it was not feasible. Although this method could allow a beta to have children, no one could guarantee 100% success, especially the final delivery step, which would require a cesarean section. A bloody operating table, Louis didn't want his clumsy beta to go through that a second time. The first time was when Chris had just been with him for a year. The rival family sought revenge, and Chris led the people away to save him. He was beaten until he vomited blood but still didn't reveal his location to them. When he arrived with his men, those people were stabbing him with knives. During the rescue, a small section of his intestines was removed, and he almost didn't make it. Louis couldn't bear to see such a scene a second time. But he knew even better what kind of person his father was, domineering and strong-willed. If he really got involved, his clumsy beta would suffer untold grievances. While he was caught between a rock and a hard place, that omega from the Schur family suddenly appeared. Using his belly to have a child for him and Chris to raise, it couldn't be more perfect. Just as he was feeling relieved, Chris righteously told him that Simon was a very good omega and that he should treat him well, and that he would no longer disturb them. At first, he just thought Chris was jealous of Simon, deliberately causing trouble with him. He even joked that if Chris behaved well, he wouldn't mind keeping him after marrying Simon. The clumsy fawning he expected from his silly beta didn't appear. Instead, Chris called him a scumbag, said he wasn't worthy of Simon, got angry with him, and wouldn't let him touch him. He even ran away from home without a word when Louis was on a business trip. Louis fiddled with the imperial green board in his hand, growing increasingly annoyed the more he thought about it. His fingers had several cuts from polishing it. He wanted to give Chris a surprise, yet couldn't help but wave his injured hands in front of him, hoping Chris would feel sorry for him and ask about them. But the result was Louis casting pearls before swine. Chris didn't even ask. For so many years, Chris had been like this, never saying anything extra, never doing anything extra, only doing what he was told. So Louis got angry that Chris didn't care enough about him, angry that he was like a wooden dummy. He then started to be picky, disliking this about Chris and disliking that about Chris, using this dissatisfaction to vent that dissatisfaction. There was also a sense of showing off, boasting that no matter how critical he was of Chris would always follow him without hesitation. But ultimately, Louis couldn't bring himself to abandon Chris. Thinking that Chris's birthday was tomorrow, he couldn't leave him out in the cold. For all memorable moments, he wanted to be with Chris. To have free time for this day, he had worked overtime day and night, completing all his work plans in advance, just waiting to celebrate his birthday. This time, he wouldn't hold it against him. But for Louis to apologize was harder than climbing to heaven. After much hesitation, he still called Jason. "Where's your brother? Why isn't he home yet? I want to see him in 2 hours." The other end of the line stuttered, and after Louis pressed repeatedly, he found out his silly beta was lost. The kidnapping 4 years ago still haunted him. He immediately hung up the phone and ordered the butler. Send people to find him immediately. 3 hours later, Louis called Jason in front of him and threw a stack of photos at him. In the photos, his beta was standing with an omega, picking up a 5 or 6-year-old girl from school. The three of them went to the market together, holding hands and interacting, even drinking from the same bottle of water. Louis's face turned extremely grim, staring at Jason. "Tell me, who is he?" Jason's lips moved, but he couldn't say a single word. He didn't even dare to dodge the water glass Louis threw at him. When Louis brought people over, I was cleaning the noodle shop. At 8 in the evening, there weren't too many people in the noodle shop, only a few scattered tables. Like me, they all looked somewhat surprised at this group of people in suits who were so out of place in this small noodle shop. My gaze shifted back, and I saw Jason beside Louis, his hair disheveled, and a fresh, bright red wound not yet fully dry on his forehead. Faced with my questioning gaze, Jason explained somewhat flustered, I didn't tell Seo Lu about you and my sister-in-law. Seo Lu found out himself. Before he could finish, Louis slapped him across the face. Who the hell are you calling sister-in-law? The crisp sound of the slap made my heart tighten. Jason fell silent, standing aside with his head down, no longer daring to say anything more. Louis has always had a bad temper, but he wouldn't hit people in public. Even if he really wanted to act, he'd have his subordinates do it. This time, he was truly furious. I looked up at him, stammering an explanation. Andy and I were divorced before I met you. People in the countryside marry young. When I was 20, relatives started introducing me to potential partners. I knew my family's situation and didn't want to burden someone else's daughter. By the time I was 22, my parents felt my being single made them lose face in the village. Several kids younger than me already had children, so they urged me to go on some blind dates. That's when I met Andy, a gentle and beautiful Omega. When there was no daughter-in-law, the whole family yearned for one. Once there was a daughter-in-law, the whole family bullied her. Even during his pregnancy, Andy received little kindness. Andy had a good temper, no match for a woman like my mother who would throw tantrums and make a scene. In the dead of winter, she insisted he wash clothes in cold water. Coming home from work, I saw his slender body shivering from the cold, still rubbing at the woolen sweater that had become incredibly heavy once wet. Suddenly, I understood the meaning of heartbreak. I didn't understand. Weren't they the ones urging me to marry? Why, after bringing someone home, treat them like this? I questioned my mother. Don't we have a washing machine at home? Why make him wash by hand? My mother spoke righteously, first citing electricity costs, then water costs. In short, the $100 second-hand washing machine wasn't as precious as my Andy. I grabbed the axe standing in the yard and smashed the washing machine she called useless to smithereens. My father tried to stop me, and my mother went to hit Andy, calling him a vixen who seduced her son into being unfilial to his mother. I shielded Andy behind me. The stick hitting my body didn't hurt. Only guilt spread with the wounds. I shouldn't have married him. After that incident, although my mother still spoke coldly, she no longer dared to give Andy any heavy chores, allowing him to rest well during his pregnancy. Life was barely tolerable. But Andy gave birth to a daughter, a beautiful and lovely female Omega just like him. A money loser in my mother's words. The child wasn't very healthy, requiring money every few days. They also refused to help care for Andy during his confinement. At that time, besides money for my brother's schooling, I kept the rest of my wages, refusing to hand them over. No matter how nasty their curses, I couldn't abandon Andy and the child. I settled Andy and the child in the town where I worked, giving the neighbor lady 1,000 yuan to help look after them and cook meals while I was at work. The town wasn't big, and my mother easily found us after asking around. She was distraught, sitting in front of our rented room, threatening to commit suicide by drinking pesticide. My father stood beside her, and after a while, he lit a hand-rolled cigarette, sighing and smoking, occasionally wiping away a few tears. We are your parents. How can you abandon us? Besides the neighbor lady who understood our difficulties, most others were either watching the spectacle or criticizing me for being unfilial. The accusations came one after another, suffocating me. I didn't give in to their demands and take her home. Instead, I got a divorce certificate from him while I was still recovering from childbirth. The bright red little booklet, the same color as a marriage certificate, brought no joy at all. I handed over my salary and then placed the divorce certificate in front of them. He's not my husband anymore, so don't bother him anymore. Having just one of me in this mire is enough. Back then, I had to work 2 jobs a day, earning more money so I could provide a little more for Andy and the child. When the child was 2, she was diagnosed with a blood disorder. Holding the test results, I suddenly felt how unfair God was. Why pick on such a small child? Why not come for me instead? How much better it would be if I were the one who got sick. I took Andy and the child to H-City to seek medical treatment, and at my most desperate, I ran into Dave, my childhood friend. He was doing well, working as a supervisor at a club. Seeing my difficulties, he offered me a job as a waiter there. He told me to undergo training diligently and memorize the rules, saying that the guests here were generous, and there were tips in addition to the salary. This is where I met Louis. He had been drugged and forcefully pushed away an ill-intentioned Omega who was throwing themselves at him. then dragged me into his room. Dave was right. The guests here were very generous. Endure one night and you could get 100,000 yuan. I could finally catch my breath a little on this relentless journey. From that wad of money, I took out a stack and handed it to Dave. He squatted on the steps and offered me a cigarette, saying, "I brought you in here to help out my brother, not to make money as a pimp." He said even 100,000 yuan wouldn't be enough for the child's medical treatment, and it would be best if I could secure a connection with Louis. But someone like Louis isn't someone people like us can just cling to. He scratched his head, unable to come up with a good plan, and also worried about overdoing it and making things worse, thus angering Louis. Fortunately, Louis, who had never experienced a beta, found it interesting and asked him about me again. He spoke eloquently, describing me as a pitiable little white flower with ailing parents unable to do heavy labor, a younger brother still in school, and having started working at 16 to support the family, truly pitiful. He exaggerated and embellished, making no mention at all of my previous marriage. With his recommendation, I, who had always been unassuming, surprisingly received a measure of Louis's pity. After he sought me out 2 more times, he simply took me on as his exclusive companion. The loan was repaid, the children's medical expenses were covered, and Jason's tuition for next year was secured. When my parents found various reasons to ask me for money, I no longer had to make excuses to delay. Because of Louis, my dim sky suddenly brightened. I have to admit, money can smooth out many of life's troubles and wrinkles. I am grateful to him, extremely grateful. So when he was in danger, I thought I'd repay Louis with this life of mine, which isn't worth much. Perhaps God knew I had complained about him, so he wouldn't let me escape my suffering early. And so I lived again. As a blessing in disguise, Louis treated me even better. Amidst those hidden, lingering intimacies, Louis's sweet nothings made me entertain a delusional hope. Louis seemed to truly like me. It was a feeling, called being loved. For most of my life, I had never experienced such a thing, and only on rare occasions did I feel I had possessed it. Apparently, this time was also an illusion. I stood outside the private room door and personally overheard him telling his friends that I was just a thick-skinned beta, more durable than an omega, wouldn't be marked, didn't need to be responsible for, and would sell my life for a little money, so just keep me around. His friends played wild games. I occasionally had to accompany him to some extravagant occasions, where I saw omegas kneeling on the ground, omegas locked in cages, and omegas or betas being auctioned on a stage. Watching his friends sweet-talk different people every time, sounding pleasant and captivating. It was then I understood that, for people like them, sweet talk was merely a minor branch beneath lies. Louis would be no exception. I often zoned out in such places because I felt I should also be one of those people openly priced on the stage. I was just relatively lucky to have met a generous benefactor like Louis, so I didn't have to be excessively miserable. I cautiously followed Louis. In truth, I loved talking to people, telling them about things I encountered and things I saw, but they always found me annoying and said I was verbose, so I gradually stopped talking. I became the dull person they described. Fortunately, such a person has little presence. If unseen, they won't be remembered, and they'll suffer a little less criticism. But Louis wasn't like that. No matter what I did, he saw it and could find fault, so I had to be careful, and even more careful. During the time I spent with Louis, everyone else was getting better and better. Dave became a club manager. My parents moved into a 2-story house, and Andy ran a noodle shop with his children, living comfortably. Only I was waiting to be kicked away by Louis, and felt even more ashamed of myself when I saw Simon. Her beautiful face, prominent family background, and somewhat romantic personality were all things I couldn't compare to. So when Louis said he could still keep me even after marrying Simon, all I could picture was Louis's face, saying similar sweet nothings to one omega after another. I was very angry. Simon is not like me, and shouldn't be treated casually. So, homeless me is about to start wandering. That's when my ex-wife, Andy, stepped forward and said to me, "The child and I have been waiting for you for a long time. Do you want to come home?" The joy of soon having a home overwhelmed me, and I completely overlooked the potential dangers. I stood in front of Andy and the child, who had come downstairs to see what was happening, and pleaded with Louis. "They don't know anything. If you have a problem, direct it at me. Okay?" Justice, 6 years old, soft and fair-skinned, peeked out from behind me, whimpering, "Uncle, Please don't bully my daddy. He slowly knelt down under my gaze, reaching out to ruffle her little head. How could Uncle bully Daddy? Uncle likes your daddy the most. With that, he looked up at me again. Isn't that right? I looked down at Louis's face. His features were delicate, his nose bridge high, and even the corners of his lips turned slightly upwards when expressionless, making him look like he was smiling, giving the impression of a gentle person. I knew that wasn't true. He had always been someone who would return 10 times the hurt he received, formidable and overbearing. I nodded, grateful that he gave me dignity, and didn't expose her father's embarrassment to justice. But that dignity only lasted until the moment I got into the car with him, when he tore it to shreds with his own hands. He pressed me against the car window, biting my nape. The bloody pheromones poured into my gland like a flood, the pain and throbbing overwhelming me. He was like an otter in heat, left with nothing but sex and violence. I cried, begged for mercy, until just before I fainted, I heard Louis's hoarse, suppressed question. Chris, what have you taken me for all these years? Louis locked me up and took my phone. When I woke up in bed, besides the bruises all over my body, there was also a jade pendant on my neck. I looked down at it. Although I didn't understand jade, I knew Louis never gave cheap gifts. I took off the jade pendant, wrapped it in soft tissue, and carefully placed it in the drawer of the bedside table. The butler told me that Louis had received a call early in the morning and left in a hurry, not saying when he would return. I curled up on the living room sofa, waiting and waiting. In the mid-afternoon, I went to the kitchen to start cooking. My cooking tasted quite ordinary. It was either too salty or too bland, and when it wasn't, it felt undercooked. Louis didn't like it. He said if it weren't to avoid wasting food, he wouldn't eat my cooking. When I didn't cook much, he would ask if I knew that to win a man's heart, you first have to win his stomach. Did he have to personally teach me how to serve my own man? I didn't want to win Louis over, but apologies should have an apologetic attitude. Washing vegetables, cutting meat, stir-frying around 7 o'clock, I set the dishes on the dining table. The faint steam gradually dissipated, so I took the dishes back down to reheat them. Repeat this several times, until the hands passed 12 o'clock. Today is my birthday. Louis used to spend it with me. My younger brother's birthday is 2 days before mine. Ever since I can remember, my birthday had to be moved up to this day to celebrate together. I had to watch my brother make a wish and eat the cream flowers off the cake before I could get a slice. I cried and made a fuss, but my parents said I was the older brother, so I should give in to my younger brother and be understanding of their hardships. I got used to it, so I stopped making a fuss. I stood aside, holding a plate, waiting for a slice of cake with not too much cream. It was only after I started following Louis that I had the right to make a wish. I once seriously wondered why I couldn't bring myself to leave Louis after my life got better. Louis has a foul mouth and a bad temper, and often makes things difficult for me, but I am also often grateful to him for giving me a very good life. I don't know why, in my current situation, I still harbor a secret expectation for Louis. I hope he can come back and have a meal with me. This is terrible, so I must break completely with him. By the third day, just as dusk was falling, Louis returned. He seemed very tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was a bit disheveled, as if he had slept in the car. He asked, "Where's the peace charm I gave you?" "It's in the nightstand. I gave it to you to wear, why put it away?" I lowered my head and whispered, "It's too valuable. I can't accept it." "What?" Louis seemed to have heard a joke, then reacted, letting out an ambiguous chuckle from his throat. "What? Not selling anymore? Want to go home and live with that Omega? Chris, you really should look in the mirror. What about you do you think that Omega would like, other than using you to make money by selling your ass to support his child?" Saying that, he slammed a stack of documents into my arms. "See for yourself." I flipped through the documents in my hand, which contained many photos of Andy. Initially, there were 2 little boys in the photos, but I could still distinguish Andy at a glance. Andy, when he was a few years old, looked exactly like Justice with short hair standing in the photo, gradually growing taller and brighter in many ways I had never seen. He was very handsome, never disappointing at any stage from childhood to adulthood. But after 16, everything changed. His gaze became shifty, he mostly kept his head down, and the fabric on his body became increasingly scarce. His demeanor resembled many Omegas I had seen, kneeling on the ground, locked in cages, standing on auction blocks. Andy's original name was Ben. His father was sentenced to death for taking the blame for the Song family. After his father went to prison, he was taken in by the Song family and lived with Steve, who was of similar age. He grew up in an affluent environment and was considered childhood sweethearts with Steve, an alpha. When Steve was 18, the Song family was in a period of transition, with power shifting and undercurrents stirring. His parents tragically died in a car accident, and the Song family was formally taken over by his third uncle, Eric. It was also at this time that Ben was sent away by Steve himself to his third uncle, Eric. Eric had no children. After this, he kept Steve by his side, training him as his successor. For Steve, the only price for gaining benefit was to let the Omega he grew up with become someone else's dog. In high society, beauty without backing merely served as a circulating currency. As a social tool, Ben was repeatedly given to others by Eric. In just 5 years, he had his mark cleansed 3 times and aborted twice. Until the Ben in the photograph no longer stared blankly at the alpha he grew up with, and from then on, he changed his name, went to Q-Town, and met me. Just a few pages chronicled the bleak and bitter first half of an Omega's life. Louis sat on the sofa, feigning indifference as he sipped tea, but in reality, every hair on his body was focused on my movements. Watching me turn to the last few pages of the document. It was a paternity test report. The conclusion was affirmative. They were indeed biological father and daughter, but the father's column did not bear my name, but Steve's. My fingers trembled slightly, without much emotional fluctuation. I slowly closed the document, neatly placed it on the coffee table, and looked up at Louis, who was drinking tea on the sofa. So? Louis slammed his teacup onto the table. It should be me asking you. You idiot, you've been raising someone else's child all these years. For this bitch who's been ridden by 1,000 men and pressed by 10,000. Shut up. This was the first time I had ever yelled back at Louis. I forbid you to talk about him like that. You forbid it? Louis stood up, losing control of his temper. Just because you forbid it, he's not a bitch? Or are you just into trash like that? Well, it makes sense, he must be great in bed. Why didn't you learn a trick or two from him to serve me? Louis's shouting was cut short by my punch. You motherfucker. You actually dared to hit me for that trash. The flames of jealousy were driving Louis insane. Yes, it was jealousy. He deeply understood that the Omega named Ben was unfortunate, suffering, passively accepting everything life threw at him, and even after escaping the Song family, he bore a sick child, struggling desperately on the brink of life and death every day. But this less fortunate Omega met Chris. A Chris who, despite not having much ability, was willing to cover for him. A Chris who would still protect him even after learning the child wasn't his. Why? What did Louis, lack compared to this Omega? He wanted a little love from Chris, but was ashamed to ask for it. So he used words as sharp swords to frantically belittle the Omega who had endured so much hardship, foolishly trying to tell Chris that the Omega wasn't worth his continued love. But Chris, for the sake of that Omega, actually hit him, his eyes fierce. In an instant, he began to resent that this beta wouldn't give him even a little love. Hatred is easier than love. Isn't it? Fists flew. Louis refused to accommodate me any longer, until I lay on the ground unable to fight back. He grabbed my hair. Chris, starting today, I'll show you the price of deceiving me. In the bedroom, doctors filed in to examine me. My range of movement was restricted. I couldn't go anywhere but the bedroom. They applied medicine and gave me injections. The next day, doctors still came to give me injections. They were just superficial injuries. I didn't understand why I needed injections. I looked at the doctor warily. I won't take this shot. I want to see Louis. The doctor said nothing, waved a hand, and 4 private security guards entered, tying me to the bed with restraints. What exactly are you injecting me with? I won't take it. I want to see Louis. They didn't respond to me, but after I tried to ram the door, jump out the window, and smashed everything in the bedroom, the restraints, which were originally only used during injections, remained on me continuously. On the 7th day, I pleaded with the butler who came to deliver food. I was wrong. I won't make trouble anymore. Can I see Louis? The butler's silence was my only response. I looked at the ceiling with some despair. How long would Louis keep me locked up? What kind of injection was I getting every day? How were Andy and the children? Would they be very worried about me? Innumerable questions piled upon me, and in a daze, I seemed to see Andy for the first time on that first snowy day of the year. He wore a white down jacket and a bright red scarf, making it hard for him to blend in with the surrounding white. He looked up at the sky, greeting the falling snow, like an elf. Having lived in this small town for so many years, that was the first time I had seen such a beautiful person. I stood frozen in the middle of the road, the jarring honk of a car and the driver's curses jolted me awake. Because of the situation over here, he turned his head and glanced in my direction. But it was just a glance. There are many beautiful things in the world, but not everyone is qualified to touch them. So, I lowered my head again and walked the path I should walk. That day was the day I was meeting someone for a blind date, a very feisty female beta. She said the bride price should be 200,000, the 3 golds couldn't be less, and a house in the county town was needed for the children's schooling in the future, and as for a car, at least a 100,000 yuan car for commuting. She spoke non-stop, while I just awkwardly drank plain water. Had the matchmaker not clearly explained my family's situation to her? My family simply couldn't afford the things she was asking for. After I explained the situation, she put the last piece of brisket in her mouth, threw down her chopsticks and said, "What kind of blind date are poor people going on? You're wasting my time." She ordered 4 meat dishes and a soup, and the meal cost me nearly a month's worth of food money. So what she said made perfect sense. Just this once, then, I picked up my rice and used my chopsticks to pick at the remaining side dishes on the plate. My eyes met Andy, who had just walked into the small diner, and my eating slowed down involuntarily. He ordered a small portion of egg-fried rice, and even the way he ate was graceful, unhurried, making not a sound. This was the second time I had seen him, today. The third time I was helping out at my childhood friend Lee's snack stall. He had a harder life than me. His father died early, and his mother ran off with someone else after his father died, leaving him to depend on his grandfather. Children without parents are easily bullied, and he was no exception. One of his ears was even deafened from being slapped. There weren't many kids in the whole village who didn't bully him, and I was one of them. When he learned my blind date had failed, he also looked a bit downcast. The dream of finding a wife who doesn't want anything and is willing to spend a lifetime with me, I wouldn't even dare to dream it when I'm asleep now. He was still talking about something else, but I didn't catch it. My eyes were fixed on the distance, where 2 or 3 hoodlums were blocking Andy, their hands not so innocently touching him. I stood up, about to walk over there, but Lee grabbed my arm and shook his head at me. "Don't go looking for trouble. It has nothing to do with us." But if I didn't go over, what would happen to that Omega afterwards? So, Chris, not so heroically, stepped forward to block Andy and was beaten into a sorry state by the 3 hoodlums. It was only when Lee, hiding to the side, yelled that the police were coming that the hoodlums stopped and left. 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. If there had only been one person opposite me, I definitely wouldn't have lost so embarrassingly. But a loss is a loss, explaining it wouldn't help much. I just felt terribly ashamed. I lowered my head and said to the beautiful Omega in front of me, "It's getting dark. Hurry home. It's not safe for an Omega like you to be out alone." He didn't turn around, but pulled me to the nearby clinic for some antiseptic. He said, "Hello, my name is Andy." He was a little shorter than me. When he looked up at me, his eyes seemed so big, like the eyes of a very expensive pedigree cat in a display window, like jewels. Even the way he tilted his head and smiled at me was similar. Thus, the instinct to approach beautiful things could no longer be restrained, gradually causing one to lose reason. We exchanged numbers. As long as he needed anything, I would show up, fixing pipes, moving things, doing all sorts of odd jobs. Lee advised me, "Don't dream. An Omega like that won't be with people like us." But I thought about it. I didn't want his love. I just wanted to hear him say a word, to talk to him. Isn't that already enough to make me happy? Andy said I was the first friend he had made since coming here, and that was already very good. The town wasn't big, and after those few hooligans learned that Andy had no one to rely on, they often came to harass him. One night, the drunken hooligans actually went straight upstairs and started banging on the door. Andy could only call me, crying, his voice trembling with fear. I quickly scrambled out of bed, hopped on my motorcycle, and rode the 20-minute journey from the village to the town in 12 minutes. The police arrived shortly after. Ultimately, nothing had actually happened, so all the police could do was give a verbal warning. Once settled, Andy threw himself into my arms, his voice a soft tremor. "Chris, my stomach hurts." I took him to the hospital, held him during examinations, and when I dropped him off at the examination room door to wait, I noticed blood on my hand. The doctor said Andy was pregnant, already 3 months along. It was a good thing we brought him in promptly, otherwise, the baby might not have been saved. The doctor assumed I was Andy's partner and naturally started scolding me, asking how I could be a husband and not even know my own Omega was pregnant. He said Andy's physical condition was actually very poor, and if he didn't keep this child, he might never have children again in the future. After explaining the precautions to me, he told me to handle the admission procedures. When I returned to the ward, I saw only Andy sitting alone on the bed, looking up at the 4-drip that was almost finished. Frail, pale, yet forced to be strong. The display window shattered, and the beautiful ragdoll cat inside, which had once been meticulously cared for, roamed through crowds and traffic. Its fur became matted, and it lived alone in an unnoticed corner, frantic and terrified, licking its wounds. When I met him, the display window must have just shattered. I asked him, "Where is your alpha?" "I don't have an alpha." "No. Alpha? What will you do about your child?" After a child is born, both parents are needed to register their household. Without registration, school and medical care will be problems everywhere. He looked down at his stomach thoughtfully. "Then I won't keep this child." But giving up the child meant he might lose the qualification to be a mother forever. I slowly squatted beside him and asked cautiously, "Then, can I be his dad? Because we're good friends, aren't we? I just wanted a home. I just wanted to get a little closer, to live out a dream that even Lee dared not imagine, even if it was just an empty shell. Moreover, what I've been best at since childhood is giving for others. I want to see Louis, and a hunger strike seems to be my only method." His eyes held disdain. "Threatening me with your life, do you think I'd care?" I didn't know, but he appeared. The reason he's so angry now is simply that I concealed our marriage. After all, the premise of his initial sponsorship was that I was clean. I should have explained it to him immediately when he found out, but he didn't give me a chance to explain. I can't delay any longer. His wedding with Simon is getting closer, and I can't stay. I laid bare everything about Andy and me. "Louis, you come from a good background and a good family. You don't know how hard it is to live without money. I didn't mean to deceive you, but if I hadn't done that back then, justice wouldn't have survived. I truly had no other choice. Although I concealed the fact that I was married, I didn't lie about anything else. I am pure, I've only been with you, and I've upheld my duties. Now you're also getting married. Can you, considering my dedicated service these past 5 years, not make things difficult for me? Let me leave." Dedicated service. Louis chewed on these words, his eyes growing even more gloomy. "You're telling me all this. Can I interpret it as, even if Andy wouldn't even sleep with you, you would still give him everything? And your 5 years with me were just to make money to be his lapdog? Now that your family is doing well and the child is saved, you want to ditch me and even ask me to be magnanimous. Is that what you mean?" The alpha, tall and imposing, suddenly stood up, casting his shadow over my entire being. I don't know if it was my imagination, but I felt a surge of malevolence emanating from him. "Chris, have you ever really looked at yourself? Dull and clumsy with no real ability. As for looks, you're merely not ugly. And when it comes to serving a man in bed, I honestly can't tell if you're serving me or I'm serving you. So what market does a beta like you have? Back then, I thought you were pure, so I paid you a high price. But it's not like that anymore. I feel like I've lost out. How about this? Each time I sleep with you counts as 1,000, and the time I almost died for you counts as 1,000,000. I remember you told me your cousin had an accident at a construction site and was compensated. That much, so this price isn't bullying you. Calculate how much you still owe me. Pay it back and I'll let you go. Can't pay it back? Then continue to pay with your body. Of course, you can be unhappy, go on a hunger strike, or even die. But then don't blame me for going to your relatives and friends, your so-called wife and children, to collect the debt. After all, they all benefited from my money. As for what methods might be used to collect debts, I think you can imagine. I looked at Louis in disbelief. How can you be like this? Why can't I? I do as I please, and I treat you however I want. Will anyone stand up for you? The hatred born from love. The twisted branches bearing fruit that is too bitter to swallow. Louis forbade me from going out but often brought news from the outside. For example, after I was taken away, Andy took the child back to the Song family. Now that Steve is in charge of the Song family, the obstacles are gone, and the two have reconciled and are living happily ever after. For example, Jason, knowing I was imprisoned, chose to let the matter rest after Louis gifted him a 60 million yuan villa. For example, my parents beamed with joy when Jason brought his girlfriend home. They proactively gave her a red envelope and took her to buy a gold bracelet. Louis laughed. Will you be treated the same as your younger brother when you get married? I think the Omega your brother found is far inferior to Ben in both looks and temperament. Is it that Ben is not as good as that Omega, or are you not as good as your brother, and you have to drag Ben into suffering with you? Shut up. I spoke with difficulty. My voice filled with suppressed pain. But if I shut up, would it stop being true? All these years of struggle were merely my proof that I was worthy of love. But the truth proved. Without Chris, it wasn't too great a loss for everyone. Nobody loved Chris. He forced me to admit, over and over, that even my biological parents only raised me as a living creature, just like the chickens, ducks, and geese they kept in the yard. Many things I was simply never worthy of. So what about you? Louis, did you like me even a little? Or was it just the anger of being deceived by a plaything like me? Louis and Simon broke off their engagement. He blamed me for all the responsibility of breaking off the engagement with Simon, saying he only called it off because I seduced him. He said Simon hated me to death, and he'd whisper in my ear, mimicking how she cursed me. Look at you, you see a slightly pretty Omega and you want to be nice to them, but tell me who doesn't find you disgusting? I held back my tears, refusing to let them fall, but they gushed out, vying for release. Louis was like this every day, telling me these things every single day. I couldn't take it anymore. I really couldn't take it anymore. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Don't treat me like this anymore. And what else? Louis wasn't having an easy time either at this moment. Such a breakdown was torture for him too. Besides apologies, what else was there? I didn't know. I really didn't know. Seeing my confused look, Louis grew angry, infuriated, grabbing my neck and demanding loudly, "What else? Besides I'm sorry. What else?" What else could I say to him? Did he still want to hear a tiny bit of my love, which he disdained? He forgot that in that strange and dazzling private room, his close friend teased me. Always like a little tail, wishing you could grow on our Louis. What will you do if Louis doesn't want you someday? At that time, I almost died for Louis. Not long after I was discharged from the hospital, he was exceptionally good to me. So good that I felt very precious. So I blurted out, "Louis likes me very much, he won't abandon me." My confident words seemed to ignite the excitement of the whole room. Everyone who heard me burst into laughter, like a piercing sword threatening my eardrums. I looked at Louis for help. He drank the wine offered to him, downing it in one gulp, his throat bobbing. Then he looked at me, a little smug. That depends on your performance. In an instant, everyone else's eyes became playful, seemingly mocking how an ordinary beta like me dared to suggest Louis liked me. The colorful lights shone on my face, hiding the fact that it was flushed red with shame and indignation. I made an excuse to go to the restroom to escape the living hell. When I returned, standing outside the private room, I clearly heard Louis say, "Betas are tough and more resilient than Omegas. They can't be marked, so there's no responsibility. They don't cost much to keep around as a little plaything." Turns out I wasn't that precious. Turns out I was just a little plaything. For Louis, keeping me didn't cost much. Standing outside the private room, I was a little silent, a little like crying. Later, I thought that this was normal. I shouldn't have overthought it, shouldn't have taken the little kindness Louis showed me as something extraordinary. A little plaything shouldn't expect too much. But now, why does Louis torment me like this? He won't allow me happiness, won't allow me to be well. He's determined to show me the consequences of a lowly person like me messing with Louis. No matter how I admit my mistake, he still won't forgive me. He won't forgive. When I was 5 months pregnant, Louis's attitude began to change. At that time, I was suffering terribly from severe morning sickness and felt like crying for no reason. I had just finished quietly weeping under the covers when Louis came in. I wiped my tears with the corner of the quilt and pretended to be calm. He asked me, "Are you feeling very ill? You didn't eat lunch properly." It wasn't that I didn't want to eat. I simply couldn't. But what was the use of telling Louis? Would he stop me from having the baby just because I was uncomfortable? He'd probably think I was being overly sensitive. His best friend's Omega had several children. Why was a tough beta like me complaining? He'd just scold me again. I sat up from under the covers, my back ramrod straight. "No, I'm not feeling very ill. I ate a lot this morning, so I wasn't very hungry at noon. I'll eat well tonight." I spoke very earnestly, explaining to him and promising to eat well later, without any perfunctory tone. But Louis was still not satisfied. In fact, I hadn't eaten much that morning and had even thrown up over the toilet mid-morning. I wondered if the housekeeper had told him. The housekeeper was a tattletale. No matter what I did, he would tell Louis. I cautiously observed Louis. He was rubbing his fingers, a small, unconscious habit he had when thinking. Sure enough, a moment later, he loudly questioned me. "You're clearly feeling too ill to eat. Why do you have to lie to me?" The sudden rise in his voice startled me, and my body involuntarily trembled. I didn't argue, just bowed my head. With my somewhat dark complexion, I looked like a little stray dog that had done something wrong, being scolded by its owner and not knowing what to do. Besides, I was pregnant. It was truly pitiful. Louis watched the scene, and it felt like a needle piercing his eyes. He suddenly lost his voice. It was also from that day on that Louis stopped saying those harsh things to me, but he would force me to talk to him. If I refused, he'd get angry, raise his voice for a few sentences, then suddenly quiet down and storm off to the balcony to smoke. When I asked him if we could be even after I gave birth to his child, he suddenly exploded. "Chris, are you trying to infuriate me to death so you can go live with that Omega? You're dreaming, I tell you. You'll never be able to repay me. Even if you work like a dog your whole life. Even if you die, you'll be buried in my Lou family's cemetery." That was truly despairing. "Louis, I hate you." The suppressed resentment was like a flood finding an outlet. "I don't want to have your baby. I don't want to stay by your side. I hate you. I hate you." A warm gush flowed between my legs, accompanied by Louis's slap across my face, and I completely passed out, missing Louis's frantic chaos. When I opened my eyes again, only Andy's gentle face was there. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was still dreaming, and had to pinch myself hard to feel that it was real. Louis was a liar. He said Andy had returned to the Song family and was living happily with Steve. But the truth was, those photos testifying to their happiness were the work of a Photoshop expert. Andy had indeed returned to the Song family, but it was out of concern for my safety, desperately seeking help, hoping to use the favor he had previously done for Steve to get him to save me. Steve had caused a lot of trouble for Louis, and on his birthday it was Steve who held him up, preventing him from coming back. He also offered to help me pay off my debt, but he couldn't get me out. Regarding Steve, Andy spoke lightly, only saying that he and Justice were very worried about me, but Justice was gone, and he himself almost didn't make it out of the Song family. The same kind of imprisonment drama as with Louis was also used on Andy, except Andy was more ruthless than me. Before escaping, he stabbed Steve 3 times, regretting that he hadn't hit a vital spot. On his way to escape, he met Louis, who was looking for him. A silence fell between us. It was hard to comfort each other, and we seemed to have fallen into the same predicament we faced years ago, with no other option but to rely on Louis. And I knew his only condition for protecting Andy was that I successfully give birth to a healthy child for him. A lone tree cannot stand. Andy and I seemed to have no one to rely on, so we could only warm and support each other. I made an effort to eat well, sleep well, and go for walks with Andy at regular times. When I saw Louis, I would speak kindly and actively take his pinky finger. Seeing no resistance from him, I would then hold his entire hand. I couldn't help but examine him. He was truly handsome. Even his hands were perfect, well-proportioned and slender, with distinct knuckles. He was fair-skinned, and when the sunlight hit him, he looked like white jade. I couldn't resist caressing his neatly trimmed, rounded fingernails. Lost in thought, his cold voice came from above me. Don't you hate me? You'll get close to me for that Omega, is that it? That stern voice pulled my thoughts back, and only then did I remember that I wasn't in a position to be so intimate with him, and all his kindness towards me was for the purpose of making me keep this child. Wealthy families place great importance on bloodlines. His father had been urging him to have children for a long time, and I knew that. His father was even more domineering, and their relationship wasn't great. Every time I saw him, I felt the pressure multiply. For Louis to be so understanding with me, his father must really be pushing hard this time. I silently withdrew my hand. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Louis's long silence was my only response. Before entering the operating room, I was a bit scared, shivering uncontrollably. How could a beta give birth? Louis told me everything would be fine, but I always felt he just wanted me to die on the operating table, to kill me legitimately, and then keep the child. So I was scared, constantly living in immense fear. From the moment I got pregnant with this child, every day was a mental preparation for death. But when this day actually arrived, I still couldn't stop trembling, couldn't stop crying. I didn't want to be buried in the Liu family cemetery either. Crying, I asked Louis, have I been very well behaved these past days? Very well behaved, you're very well behaved. Don't be afraid. Don't worry, I won't bully you again from now on. Okay? Not bully me? He's such a dominant person. Even if he became a ghost, he'd surely bully me every day. It'd be better to scatter me into the sea then. Bury me next to him. It was rare for Louis to be so amenable, so I made 2 requests. First, could Louis, for the sake of me bearing him a child, look after Andy and not let Steve bully him? He was truly pitiful. Second, after I died, my ashes were to be scattered into the sea, not buried in the Liu family graveyard. Louis looked at me and laughed, then gritted his teeth and said, "Let go of me. We're going into the operating room now." I still clung tightly to the doorframe. I wouldn't let go unless Louis agreed. Louis pried my fingers off, cursed under his breath, and then softened his voice. All right, I promise you everything, okay? I let go, wiped my nose, and took one last look at Andy. You must take good care of yourself from now on. I can't stay with you anymore. After the anesthesia wore off, I woke up. Louis had a cold expression, and Andy gently carried over a wrinkled baby. I didn't react at first and instinctively asked, "Whose child is this? Why is it so ugly?" Newborns usually aren't very attractive. But when Justice was born, he was fair and clean, like a porcelain doll. This made the baby in Andy's arms now seem rather unsightly by comparison. Louis's face darkened further when I said the baby was ugly. He carefully took the baby from Andy's arms. His movements were not very skilled, looking a bit comical. He said to the baby in his arms, his voice tinged with coolness, "Your mom only likes other people's children, not you." It belatedly dawned on me that I had given birth to the child, and I hadn't died, and there was a jade pendant hanging around my neck. The one Louis gave me for my birthday. It seemed I had thought too badly of Louis. Throughout my confinement month, Andy and the maternity nurse took care of me during the day. When Louis got off work, he wouldn't let Andy come. He personally took care of my diet and daily needs. In the middle of the night, when I got up to feed the baby, he would also stay and watch. Seeing the dark circles under his eyes, I tentatively said, "I can take good care of the baby. Aren't you still working during the day? If you're worried, there's still the maternity nurse." He gave me a meaningful look, then asked, "Why do you never tell Andy not to come and take care of you?" I pouted and didn't reply. I didn't know if he was crazy, always being sarcastic. I hadn't provoked him. However, he didn't yell at me again. He fed me well, clothed me well, and even invested in Andy's noodle shop, helping him expand and grow. He even hired the best lawyer for Justice to fight for custody. At banquets, he openly pulled me along and introduced me to everyone. He spent almost every weekend with me and the child. I somehow muddled through several years with him like this until one night I suddenly woke up, wondering, do I already have family and a lover? Today, Louis called to say he had a dinner engagement and told me to go to bed early and not wait for him. I looked out the window. It was storming. Would Louis still come back? Would he get wet in the rain? I put on my coat, grabbed a black umbrella, and walked to the main gate. Just in time, That Maybach with its lights flashing drove in through the gate. Louis seemed to have drunk too much. When I helped him out of the car, he practically put his entire weight on me. The butler had to support me from behind to prevent me from falling. With great difficulty, I dragged him into the room, only then clearly hearing what he was mumbling. He said, "Wife don't like Andy like me, okay?" His cheeks were red, his eyes even redder, and tears flowed freely as if they were worthless. So I promised, okay. Extra. Encountering Simon while shopping with Hank, I suddenly heard someone call my name. I sharply turned around. Mr. Simon stood on the second floor of the mall, brightly and cheerfully waving at me. I subconsciously hid Hank behind me. He probably wouldn't want to see my child with Louis. But to my surprise, he rushed directly to Hank, his face excited. "Wow, so pretty." He pulled a mixed-race alpha standing beside him and introduced him to me. "My fiancé, Sebastian." Then he leaned closer. "What do you think? Isn't he even handsomer than your Louis?" It was our first meeting in 6 years. His features were open, his demeanor confident and sunny. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, thank goodness, Simon has always been doing well. He said a Thai restaurant had just opened at the mall and sincerely invited me and my little antelope Prince to have lunch with him. Antelope Prince? I looked down at Hank. He had perfectly inherited Louis's features and face shape, and my darker skin and full head of natural curls. When Mr. Simon described him like this today, it really was quite apartment. At the dinner table, I tentatively asked Mr. Simon if he no longer resented me. He looked bewildered, completely puzzled as to why I would think that. That's when I realized Louis had never told Simon anything about me seducing him. He said, "I'm going home to get married, to start a life with someone else, and I won't be your driver anymore." He suddenly felt very sad. So he decided to break off his engagement with Simon and snatch me away. He propped his chin on his hand, looking at me a little wistfully. It was really sad back then, but when I think about it, for a beta as good as you, being liked is only natural, isn't it? Then he held up his hands, intertwined with Sebastian's, showing off their matching couple rings, and boasted. But if I hadn't gone abroad, how would I have met Sebastian? Everything happens for the best, doesn't it? Throughout the meal, Simon animatedly recounted his life abroad over the past few years, chirping like a happy little bird. The mixed-race alpha didn't talk much, but kept looking at the omega beside him with a smiling gaze. His eyes filled with an indescribable tenderness. He listened intently to Simon's every word throughout, showing he truly adored Mr. Simon. That's truly wonderful. 2 months later, I received a wedding invitation from Mr. Simon and that excellent alpha. Looking at Louis sleeping beside me, I poked his cheek disapprovingly. Louis is really so bad. He made me sad for so long. Extra chapter. Louis is unhappy again today, when Andy celebrated the opening of her 9th branch in H City. Louis arrived late due to work. By the time he got there, his beta had already drunk 7 or 8 bottles of beer. He wasn't a good drinker. Because of his darker skin, one couldn't see his face flush, but judging by his hazy eyes, it was clear he'd had too much. Over the years, Andy had worked diligently, risking her life to make money. She was so busy that she even neglected Justice, leaving Chris, who was not related by blood, to act as both father and mother to her daughter. Later, he simply took Justice into his home to care for her alongside Hank. Chris had never received much warmth from his own family growing up, so he didn't want the children to live that kind of life. Fearing he wouldn't raise the child well, he forced someone who hadn't even finished junior high to pick up books again, studying child psychology, researching recipes, and learning about various interest and specialty classes, managing everything at home in an orderly fashion. He told Andy to do whatever he wanted because he would take care of things at home. Today, the two of them seemed to recall the hardships of many years ago, and tears began to fall involuntarily. Andy, his eyes red and holding his wine glass, leaned his entire body towards Chris. "Chris, I'm working so hard to earn money, so don't be afraid. Even if Louis doesn't want you, don't be scared. I can support you. I can support you." Chris picked up a tissue and gently wiped Andy's tears. His eyes also red, and said very seriously, I know, but don't work so hard. Your health is the most important." Louis sat opposite them, glaring fiercely at the two. his fingertips clenching the wine bottle, turning pale, cursing inwardly. How could this Omega's damn mouth be so eloquent? If it weren't for him covering him, Steve would have tormented him endlessly. But what happened? He earned a little money and now wants to snatch his wife. The most infuriating thing was Chris. As soon as he heard him say such things, he was incredibly moved. He also worked very hard. Why didn't he ever see him heartbroken for himself? He was clearly her most solid support. It was truly infuriating to the point of exploding his lungs. Louis was furious, but his hands honestly refilled their wine glasses, afraid that Chris would be unhappy and holding in anger would be bad for his health. After all, after giving birth, he clearly felt that Chris's physical condition wasn't as good as before, and for years he had put all his energy into him and the children. Now that he finally had a chance to relax, Louis didn't want to spoil the fun, but he still couldn't shake off the unhappiness in his heart. When Louis brought him back, Chris fell asleep in the car. After being carried to the bed, he woke up slightly, wrapped his arms around Louis's neck, refusing to let go, muttering indistinctly, hold me for a little longer." Louis pouted, a little displeased. "I thought you didn't want me to hold you?" Chris was truly drunk, completely oblivious to Louis's sarcastic words. He just buried his head in Louis's neck, his nose lightly brushing against Louis's Adam's apple, whimpering, want you to hold me." A wave of heat sprayed into Louis's neck, igniting a fire directly in his lower abdomen. It was rare for Chris to be proactive in such matters. His Adam's apple bobbed as he suppressed his voice and asked, "Say the name? Who do you want to hold you?" Louis, my husband, Louis." "Damn it." Louis cursed under his breath, then sighed. "Who said honest people can't seduce? It's deadly." Louis traced Chris's brows and eyes with his lips, then nipped his earlobe. Louis loves Chris the most, so it's only fair that Chris loves Louis the most. The drowsy Chris seemed to suddenly clear up for a moment, agreeing. "Okay."